Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you all so much for being here. I think we're going to just start off with some introductions of all the panelists, and then we're going to start chatting about our topic for the day, which is med school fears. So why don't we go around? My name is Kate. I'm a fourth year medical student. I'm currently on a leave of absence, doing a research year in India, and I'll be moderating the panel today. So how about we go around and we'll have each of our panelists just say your name, your year, where you're from, and then where you went to undergraduate. So let's start off with, how about Vidhi?
Hi everyone, my name is Vidhi Singh. I am an MS1 and I went to the University of Washington for my undergrad where I majored in bioengineering, and my hometown is Seattle.
My name is Van, like the car, the shoe. I usually hear pronouns, and I'm a first year, born and raised in San Jose, California, and wasn't far for undergrad. I went to UC Berkeley for undergrad, and I'm super happy to be here. I'll popcorn to Eugene, who I saw unmuted.
Hi everyone, my name is Eugene. I'm also an MS1. I went to Hawkins. I majored in biomedical engineering, and I'm mostly from the East Coast. I did move around a lot, but before this, I was in Virginia. And I'll popcorn it off to Ani. Am I saying that right?
Yes, you said it right. Hi guys.
Okay.
I'm Ani. I'm from LA area, so in Glendale, California. I'm an MS1, and for undergrad, I went to UC Irvine.
Hi everyone, I guess I'm the only one that's left. I'm Anais, also MS1. I went to undergrad at UC Irvine as well, and I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California.
Great. Yeah, thank you all so much for being here. Like I said, my name is Kate. I was born and raised in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I went to Occidental College, which is here in Los Angeles. And just as a reminder for everybody in the audience, there is a Q&A button down at the bottom for any questions that you have. And otherwise, let's go ahead and get started. And so I think talking about fears in medical school, I think to start off with, before you started medical school, what were some of the misconceptions that you heard or believed about medical school as an undergraduate? And did any of these end up being true? And how have you dealt with them as you've started medical school?
I can go ahead and get started with this question. I would say one of the fears I had coming in, which was just how much material we would have to learn in a small given amount of time, and then go ahead and process and understand that and apply it in examinations. Since the rest of us are MS1s, we just took our first test last week. So I think we can just speak to this now in a better informed manner. I will say that some part of that is true. You do learn a lot of content on a weekly, daily basis. But what's really great, I guess, about our school in general at DGSOM is the professors they do a good job of telling you what to focus on and what to really apply and understand in the context of examinations. Beyond that, if you have a particular interest, say you're learning about hematology oncology and you want to go in and dive deeper into it, you have every means to do that and you can go ahead and learn more. But for the purpose of just doing well and passing your classes, there is a concrete amount of information that you do need to know, which makes it a little bit more digestible.
Yeah, to kind of speak more about that, yeah, because we just took our exams, it's so fresh in my head, the misconception I had before med school is people come from various backgrounds with different majors, and they had such different experiences. So I think that was kind of scary from my perspective. I mostly study engineering, so I really was scared about lacking all the medical knowledge basically. And some people have PharmDs, some people have different degrees they specialized in. So I thought like those gaps would be like kind of like a barrier for me when I like entered and like started learning stuff. But I think it was really like a nice transition for UCLA when we started base camp. Like we had these like modules to like kind of like ease us into like the actual curriculum, which like I think kind of helped. Like, okay, like these are the stuff we're gonna focus on, like immunology, like biochemistry, like introductory like modules basically. So I think those kind of helped us prepare for like the actual classes. And I think, yeah, like the misconception I had has like slowly like been like it has been like, you know, like decreased or like relieved in a sense. Like I think we all work together, and I think like people can like kind of fill in the gaps of like, oh, like if I'm weak in like this subject, like some I can ask for like help, and like for people who like have like expertise in those areas. So I think like I'm a little bit more relieved now, I would say.
To piggyback off of that, the whole drinking out of a fire hose statement, it is kind of true. You do get like a lot of information thrown at you at once, and when you're just going into this, and like especially if you took gap years, it could be a lot and it could be stressful. And I feel like I did find myself stressing out a lot for block one, but then when I did take the exam, I was like, oh, okay, like I got this. Like so now for pit stop two, I'm not as worried as I was for pit stop one. I think it's just the initial test is kind of scary in and of itself. But I think you're gonna get the hang of like all the material being thrown at you at once and kind of balancing that and finding what method works best for you and what study skills to use.
Pit stops are what we call our sets of exams. So pit stop one just happened. Pit stop two will happen in 6 or 8 weeks, something like that. One thing that Anian mentioned that I want to build on is the fact that a lot of students in my class and our class actually took a lot of gap years and took quite a number of gap years. I think we can count on one hand how many students went straight in our class of 175. So that says a little bit about how previously when I was an undergrad, I thought there was a lot of pressure to go into medical school right away, to take the MCAT in my 3rd year of college and then apply during my 4th year. And I knew that I personally couldn't do it. Altogether, I took 3.5 gap years. And just earlier, I was using my work experience from my gap years to inform a lot of the work that I hope to do as a current medical student. And so make sure that you don't feel any pressure when it comes to determining a timeline that works well for you. As you see in our very large class, the vast majority of us took at least 1 gap year and some much more than that.
Awesome. And I think kind of building off of what Van said, you mentioned the gap years. What about the process of applying to medical school? I personally remember it being incredibly intimidating, and you guys are much closer to that than I am. I applied in like 2018. So what are like some fears that you had about the application process, the interview process, and like how did you address those?
I can go ahead and start off for this one. I think there, like during my application process, or at least this is how I felt, I thought that there was like so many myths about, having the perfect GPA or the perfect MCAT score, or needing to check off, like a certain checklist or something that's required, like for this stellar candidate. But honestly, I came to find out that it's really a holistic process, as much as like I know like it sounds cliche and you probably don't want to hear that, but it really is. There's so many factors that go into the application process and the interview that I really can't say that there's a specific recipe or there's a specific checklist that needs to be met or needs to be like crossed off in order for you to be a successful applicant or in order for you to attend med school. So I think the key thing to remember is to remember your like big why you're doing this, and really remember like what you're passionate about, and do the activities that make you like the happiest and express your passions And that really speaks volumes more than like adhering to any like sort of checklist or whatever recipe that you think needs to be followed just because like someone before you, did that. Of course, like aim, to get the best like GPA and the best MCAT score as you can. Of course, like work hard and, take the necessary like MCAT course or whatever it may be to, get a good enough score. But if you don't get that perfect score, that perfect GPA, it's not the end of the world, because it is against such a holistic process that so many factors go into it. Your extracurriculars play a big role, your story, your personal statement. So it's all really like a big myth that, if you don't have that 518 or whatever, that you can't get into like, California med schools, or if you don't have a certain GPA, you can't go to like an MD school or a California school. So I feel like that's something that I had to constantly remind myself, because not everyone is perfect, and I can say I wasn't perfect, but it's just something to remember and hopefully ease some of the worries that you guys may be having as you go into this process. Just to add a little bit more onto what Anais was saying about the midst of the application process, not to sugarcoat it, it's not the easiest process, I will say. I think it was really challenging in its own regards. There's a lot of uncertainty that you're going to feel while applying, because you don't know what's going to happen, and you're going to be putting in all this work to write these essays and to get these letters of recommendations. And it is exhausting. Like if you feel burnt out and if you feel like this is one of the hardest things I've had to do, that's really justified, because for me, I think I knew that what I was bringing to the table, I had done everything that I could to the best of my abilities. But yes, it's scary because you don't know what's going to happen. And the possibility of the what if I don't get in is so real, and something you're going to have to keep overcoming and not letting bother you on a daily basis as you're going through the application cycle, and just trust in yourself. I also do agree that I think what a med school is value more than anything is that they have applicants and students who have taken the time to not only explore this career of medicine, but also just to explore themselves as a person. And that really comes in from the whole concept of gap years, in my opinion. You don't really understand what it's like to work in the real world or who you are until you're put in these situations where you don't have these boundaries of an academic institution. I worked at a nonprofit for 2 years during my gap years. It was some of the most interesting work I've done. I had the chance to work with cancer patients and oncologists, but at the same time, I was also learning the nitty-gritty details of just being an employee, about self-advocacy at work, about resolving conflicts. Those are skills that I would say at times were more important than even some of the skills you will gain from working at a lab or working at doing any form of fellowship, like research internship or whatever in that regard. But yeah, try to learn who you are and what you bring to the table. And I promise you, it's more than your volunteer experiences at the hospital or in the research lab. While important, just think about, who am I as a whole person? How does that tie into my interest in medicine? Not so much more so as I have an interest in medicine. How do I make it make sense to everyone else?
I think Vinny answers that really well. So there's a question about whether it'd be really difficult or more difficult to get into medical school without taking gap years. I think both Anais and Vinny get at that when they talk about what it means to consider yourself as a whole applicant, and then to take that time to explore who you are and what you want to do with that, with the skills that you have and the interests that you have. I'll add on that I took 3.5 gap years, and in part it was because I worked in education. I really enjoy education, and when I applied to UCLA, one of the questions that they ask is, you're going to be a physician and my education, and is definitely education for me. And it took me that much amount of time, in part because I was working during the pandemic. So my first year as an advisor is really different from my second year, which was a COVID year, and at a different school site because of the funding that we didn't have at the original school site and school district I was at, all of which came back in the third year when I was back at the school site. And so all the different dynamics that I experienced as an educator during that time changed vastly during 3 years. And it took that much time to be able to get that much experience. And now that I have that, then I come into medical school as a much more informed person about what I want to do with my career in medicine. I was curious specifically about school-based medicine, and I wouldn't have known that if I didn't take that time off. Just to give myself as another example of how long it took for me to figure out what it was that I specifically want to do in medicine and how I was going to integrate the skills that I was building with what I want to do now. And even then, I won't have all of the answers yet, but there are a lot of faculty who are here at my medical school that can give me some insight on how I want to do that later on, or how I can do that later on. And if that's not an option yet, then how I can establish that in my career.
And I'm also someone who I took 4 gap years before medical school. And for one of my gap years, I did a Fulbright in India, actually, which is what helped me realize that I was interested in global health. And here I am now between my 3rd and 4th year doing a global health research year again in India. So it just goes to show that those gap years can be very formative in shaping kind of what you want your medical career to look like, because a medical career can look like many different things and can have many different focuses. Okay, does anybody else want to have anything else to add there? Then maybe we can talk a bit about, did anyone, the interview process? I don't know how you guys felt, but for me personally, I know that I had never like interviewed for something as big as medical school before, and doing things like the MMIs specifically, or like certain types of interviews that maybe weren't the traditional interview types. Does anybody have anything to share about that?
Really quickly, I think Eugene unmuted for the last question.
Oh, no. Yeah,
Go
I think
ahead.
I was just gonna say like Van and Vidi and like everyone like added really nice things. So I think like we can move on from like the gap year, because I know like it really varies. Like everyone's from like a really different background. Like all my colleagues, like they had different amount of gap years, but I personally took one gap year where I worked in like a startup, like a medical device company, and I thought like that also like kind of like helped me like shape like, oh, like the outstanding position and like blank part. Like I think that kind of solidified. So I just wanted to like add that on really quickly. Um, and I guess I'll answer this question too about the interview process. So personally, I have not done any MMIs, but I know there are like a lot of different like types of interviews. And personally, like I think a lot has changed since like COVID, like everything's virtual. And I think some schools this year also have like in-person interviews, but I only have done virtual interviews, which was like a different experience than many of the previous applicants. Um, and for UCLA, like the one-on-one interviews, I think I was honestly a lot more like over prepared than like what I should have been. Like I feel like I wish I took it a little bit more like casually, like in terms of like just like having a legit conversation with like someone, you know, like just wanting to learn more about you as a person, and like just wanting to know about your passion, like why you want to enter like medicine. So I feel like in terms of like preparing for interviews, the best advice I can give is just like just take a step back, like chill, and like just try to have a conversation with the person, and not just like the scripted answer, like, oh, I have to like mention that like I did this, like I have to like put in like subtle flexes. Yeah, so like I wouldn't emphasize too much on that, but just like it, yeah, it sounds cliche, but like be yourself and just like, you know, just take it like chill and don't be like me.
I'm just gonna add one quick thing about interviews that I always reflected on before I had any med school interview of any capacity. It really shows when you're trying to show off to the interviewer, when you're trying to list your accomplishments with every question that you answer. If the question is simply, tell me about, I don't know, this activity that you did. Just talk about the activity. You don't need to incorporate every single detail about the statistics of the activity or what you accomplished as whatever role you had. Just talk about it. Talk about it like you were talking about it to a friend. I will say, yes, so it shows to the person you are speaking to if you are trying to make up information, but also if you're trying to oversell that information. Just be authentic. It's a very casual conversation. Everyone there just wants to get to know you. So just, yeah, that's my biggest thing. Just be authentic as possible.
I found that the MMIs that I did required more preparation because of how unpredictable they could be. Of the MMIs that I did, none of them were ones where I'd have to act out a scene or anything like that, which was relieving to me. But I remember practicing with that. It was really difficult for me when I first started to throw myself in that situation, knowing that it was a very scripted part on their part, whereas for me, I'd have to answer as authentically as possible. On top of that, I studied a lot of bioethics just because I was worried that that would come up frequently during my interviews. And I think it came up in much more subtle ways when I'd be put in a difficult situation, I would have to use my understanding of bioethics to respond to the scenario, whereas it wasn't just like, give me the definition of what it means to do this or do that. And so I think that when it came to the preparations, I really like my traditional interviews because I could show up more authentically. I felt like when it came to MMIs, I would need to know more and be even more on my A game, because the different types of questions and the variability in the people that I had interviewing me made me much more likely to be thrown off, because I'm such a people pleaser, because I try to read the room when I know that they're all supposed to come off a certain way, like they didn't. And that was okay. I just needed to get the fact that I'm here doing my best and I'm here for a reason.
And I would also add that for MMIs, especially, I think for every single MMI that I did, I always left feeling like there was at least one station where I just did terribly. And I remember just leaving and being like, oh my gosh, like I just messed that up so badly. And in general, I would say that you're not always like the best judge of how an interview goes. And oftentimes it went just fine. And you're your own worst critic. And it's really easy to sort of overthink and overanalyze like what you said or how you said it. But I found that my perception of how I might have done in an interview wasn't always correlated to what the outcome of that application was. And so just something to keep in mind, that even if you feel like maybe, oh, I could have said this or I could have said that, it doesn't necessarily mean that you just flopped the entire thing.
Yeah, I kind of felt like that for my UCLA interview, which it was traditional, but for one of my interviewers, I wasn't really feeling connected. I mean, I had a lot of interviews where it felt very conversational and I thought like I did really well. But for UCLA, for one of them, I thought, okay, you know what, I just bombed that. I wasn't feeling connected and I wasn't feeling that it went well, but here I am today. So that just goes to say, like, don't feel like right after an interview, if you think you didn't do well, that you don't have a chance.
Great. So we've talked about the application process, and I know at the beginning we also talked a bit about that initial sort of, for I think everybody here besides me is an MS1, so that sort of transition into the academic element of medical school. I was wondering, I'm not sure, I know you guys have a new curriculum. Have you guys done anatomy lab yet? Okay. I wanted to talk a little bit more specifically about that because I know that that can be a point of nervousness for people who have never been in an anatomy lab before. So does anybody have anything to share about what that experience has been like?
I can go ahead and start. I think our school in particular and our anatomy instructor is just really amazing. And this will probably vary like from school to school, but I think pretty much most schools should do a good job of like easing you into it in terms of also having to deal with like the cadavers. And, you know, if this is like your first exposure to anything like that, I think it's okay to be nervous at first and, you know, not to know, you know, what to expect. However, also to not be scared, because there is always people you can reach out to, whether it's the anatomy instructor, you know, tutors, TAs, someone that can help ease you into it. If there's like, fears or worries about the cadaver part of it. As far as the content part of it, I think it is a lot of material, a lot of new terms being, thrown at you, especially if you haven't taken anatomy before. It could be, overwhelming, just the amount of info and then the terms that you have to learn. But the key is to, constantly repeat the information and to just put your time to go into the lab once or twice a week and review kind of what you have learned in order to solidify it, because a lot of it is, memorization, and the way to learn it is just simply to do repetition, and spaced repetition is key in my opinion. So I think it's okay to be nervous at first. I think all of us were, but it's definitely very doable.
The best advice that I had gotten, one of the best pieces of advice that I've gotten is to take anatomy prior to starting medical school so that I would get into the gist of learning the material. Like Anais is not kidding when she mentions there's a ton of material that you're learning, and I hear that the next theme that we're in, the next block that we're in, has even more of that. So it's about to really ramp up. I took anatomy when I was at UC Berkeley, and the way that they taught it is a little bit different from how we teach it here. At medical school, at least in anatomy, then there was a lot of us reviewing the material or learning the material via slides first. And then once we get into anatomy lab, then we're showing each other. And whenever we have questions, and we have really, really supportive faculty who are walking around to help answer questions and provide more insight for us. TAs have been really helpful. Our classmates, colleagues have been really helpful. But because I learned it, I was used to someone pointing at the different structures to me as a TA or as an undergrad student instructor. I was used to learning in that way. And so when I had to pivot once I got here, because I'd already learned it previously, it was really helpful for me to put together the different things that I learned previously with what I'm learning now on top of the new information that I'm learning outside of anatomy itself. Like we haven't done physiology, or I haven't taken physiology as one example. And our anatomy instructor told us specifically we aren't doing physiology here. And so we don't spend as much time learning about why different things connect to different things and what the function is. That being said, though, broadly in medical school, we're starting to learn a little bit more about what those functions are, just by nature of us learning a lot more curriculum, a lot more material to provide that context. And so I know that taking anatomy the first time, and if you're taking an undergrad, if you can, I'd also recommend taking physiology so you can connect the two. But if not, then I definitely recommend it so that you can ease or lighten that load for yourself once you are taking it in medical school.
And I would say too that I think I've heard before that every year there's at least one person who like has a moment where they get woozy in anatomy lab or passes out in anatomy lab, and it happens. And it's really like, if that ever happens to be you, it's okay. And I will also say that I think you adjust eventually to anatomy lab. Like if anybody has concerns about, I know that when I went in, like I was a little nervous because I've passed out before in the past, not specifically in a cadaver lab, but I just know that I have that propensity. And so I was very nervous that I might not handle being in the lab very well. And I will say that it is an adjustment, but you do get used to it. I think all of us eventually become very comfortable in the lab. But if for whatever reason, like you do happen to be someone who gets a little like nauseous or woozy at some point and has to sit down, or a girl in my class did end up passing out at one point, like that's okay. And it happens, and you move on, and it's really not a big deal.
That reminds me that someone also had a really emotional experience in anatomy lab as well. And our instructor, her name is Dr. Stark, she's amazing. She too, from the very first day before we're actually in anatomy, talks a lot about what it means for folks to donate their bodies so that we're able to learn in this way. And so then that UCLA, at least in particular, has taught a lot about what it means for us to be students who are learning in anatomy. And that also is really grounding prior to us being in anatomy lab.
And one of the questions that we were going to talk about in the panel today, and I don't know how much experience you guys have had yet with dealing with like blood. But I know that that is something that some people can be nervous about. And it was something that I was actually nervous about. Again, as someone who has passed out before from seeing blood, and like going into thinking about our clinical years and doing surgeries and what that would be like for me. And so I'll comment on this, and then if anybody else has something to add, please do so. But for me, I found that as with anatomy, you do eventually get used to like things like being in surgeries and seeing blood. And for me, I actually looked up certain ways to prevent getting sort of woozy or dizzy, especially in the operating room. So I like do things like shifting my feet a lot and like making sure that I don't lock my knees. I sort of like bend my knees a little bit every few minutes. And making sure that I don't like stare too long in one place, and like shifting my eyes. And so those are some techniques that I have found useful, and I've never had any issues in the operating room. But just if anybody has ever had concerns about like handling blood or handling being in the OR, as someone who has fully like conked out prior to medical school, like from seeing blood, I have been able to manage it. And I think my classmates have been able to as well. And I know we've talked a lot about the like academic transition into medical school and drinking from a fire hose. What about the social transition? Were there any fears that you guys had about that? And how has that ended up turning out for you?
I actually did. I thought like when you go to med school, you're basically not gonna have time to do anything. But I actually learned that if you basically manage your time well, you do have like time to do things that you really like to do, whether that's like at the end of the day or like to begin your day. So I see a lot of my classmates, you know, taking a stroll like at the beach, either like in the morning or like afternoon, and then people are going on like road trips. So it's all doable, I think, as long as you get the hang of like how to manage your time. There is a good balance of both that you can have. So, you know, it's work hard, play hard kind of deal here.
I think more importantly, aside from doing it as a result of being able to manage your time, it's more so needed because you need it as an outlet to kind of de-stress and decompress after all the hours of studying and, you know, being in classes and labs and whatnot. It's just really needed to be able to socialize either like with friends or on your own, do something that helps you take the stress down a notch, because you know, we can't all be functioning at that high stress level and that like haywire, you know, format at all times of the day. So it's really needed to kind of decompress, because you have to be careful of burnout, which is a real thing. And so I think being able to socialize, to participate in events, or to take some time off as soon as you feel like you need it is really important.
What's really nice, I would say, about that school is that everyone has very different interests, but you're all very like-minded in a regard, just about your goals, and everyone wants to do well and they want to learn as much as they can, which makes it really easy actually to socialize, because everyone, like Anais said, it's kind of like you have to, yeah, you have to take time off. There's no way that you can like function without taking time off for yourself. For me personally, I really like taking workout classes, and that sometimes just means that I'm taking a yoga class in the middle of my school day, or like at the end of the day I'm going to the gym to, you know, take another class of that regard. Yeah, you have to make time. I will say, funny enough, for me personally, I feel like I have a little bit more time now than I did in undergrad. Maybe that was because I was an engineering student and I was always like doing something at some given hour of the day. But this is another reason, ties back to the gap years. You really need to identify what makes you happy and what you do to de-stress. As a functioning adult outside of school, you'll realize that so much of your time in undergrad was taken up by all these activities that sometimes we do just because we have to, and we want to try to get into med school and make sure that, you know, we're engaging ourselves in meaningful manners. But then there's also things we like to do because they make us happy. So yeah, identify what makes you happy and build it into your schedule. And you will most definitely have time to do it as long as you're, you know, doing your best throughout the week. And then you can take like a Friday evening off, or you can take even Saturday evening off if you're feeling up to it.
Something that I notice is a lot of my classmates come in very secure about their identities, as in they know what they like and they know what they don't like. And so you don't have to show up to everything either. I know that different people have different levels of social batteries. I know that Eugene spends a lot of time with everyone. And then sometimes I'm like, I don't know how she does it. I am going to go home and watch BTS or something like that. And so like, given that, right, like during the time that I know that I didn't exactly what you said. I don't know what kind of person I was that I was able to manage what I did at UC Berkeley, but that doesn't work anymore. I don't want to be in that lifestyle anymore either. Absolutely not. And so earlier today, we have coaching sessions because we have instructors, facilitators here who want to make sure that we're incorporating all aspects of our life into our medical school journey, not just how we're doing academically, but socially as well. One component is that, or one component of that is who you come into medical school with. Something I like to ask folks when I get to know them is who else is here with them, in the sense that I'm curious who their support circles are coming in, because I know that when it gets really difficult, that I rely on a lot of my medical school friends to understand what it means to have this professor or these exams. There are also folks who are completely not in medicine that are in my life who I love getting to decompress with, because then I can just escape the world of medicine completely and can think about the fact that medicine is only one component of my life. It's not everything.
And I will say too, as a student who has now completed my primary clinical year, that even though during your clinical years, you do have less like structure, you have less free time in terms of like, you are required to be on rotations for like certain amounts of time and days of the week. And there are definitely rotations that are tough in terms of like, you're probably working 6 days a week and those are long days. And because you're not necessarily on the same schedule as your med school friends, you don't always match up in terms of when you have time off. And those days of the week off might be a Tuesday or it might be a Friday, and then you're the only person you know who has that day off. So it does get a little bit tougher in some ways during clinical years, but I've still found that I was able to maintain like a very solid social life during that time. I had a couple buddies who we made a goal of every 2 weeks, we would go out to dinner and try a new restaurant in LA. So even if it was after like a 13-hour day and we were exhausted, we would go out to get dinner together, and we'd be in our scrubs and just like, you know, looking very tired, I'm sure, but we would just do that every 2 weeks. And then, you know, you still do get time off. So at the end of our clinical year, we had a week off, and a couple med school friends and I backpacked Mount Whitney. And so you still do get time. And even, you know, for me, having gone through what's probably like the most busy chunk of my clinical rotations, which is end of third year, beginning of fourth year for my class, at least, I would say that it's still I still felt like I had a very good social life. And so it's not something that you have to give up to be a medical student. Okay. And what about in terms of, I know we've talked about the social aspect, we've talked about some of the academic aspects, and maybe, I don't know if any of us have used these resources before, but what are the resources that are out there? And probably, you know, we can talk more particularly about UCLA, but I'm sure a lot of these will be available at other schools as well for students who might be either struggling academically or just need a bit more support with like the classwork.
Something that, oh, go ahead, Anais, you got this.
Okay, I just noticed no one wanted to go, so I was like, I'll talk a little bit. So I think we have like a great amount of resources for students who might want like some extra help. We have like anatomy tutoring. We have help from the TAs in anatomy lab, and then like peer tutoring, weekly sessions from wonderful peer tutors who put like PowerPoint slides together, and we go on Zoom and just review the material of the week, and then also like a final review session at the end of the particular block. So that's something that can be helpful for students who might need a little extra help. And then also, I think if you approach professors and ask for office hours, they're kind of willing to do that for you too. So we've had some office hours set up by certain professors where we can go and ask questions. And also like or for our school, I guess specifically, we have the academic support office, which is another resource that you can just reach out to and maybe talk about study skills, strategies, other third-party resources that they can maybe offer to you to help guide your studying. I think that's all that comes to my mind right now, but Vidi, you can take over.
Yeah, I would have said everything that Anais said. The other thing that I really rely on is just studying with my classmates. Sometimes on the weekends, we'll just get together and whiteboard concepts that we learned in the week and just reinforce whatever material was presented to us, just by working with each other. I think your classmates are some of your biggest support systems and cheerleaders. So you just have to, stick together, work it out. And because everyone understands things in a different manner, it's really helpful actually to study together, because maybe someone's explanation makes more sense to you than a third-party resource or a professor. Everyone's really friendly is what I've come to realize. Everyone wants each other to do well. I think UCLA does a really good job of promoting this collaborative culture, just with the way that the medical school is set up. We don't have ranking. Everything is pass fail. So it's like there's no reason for you to feel any ounce of competitiveness with each other, because you all really just can work together, help each other out, pass. Everyone has different interests at the end of the day, so you're all going to figure out your own path over time.
Yeah, I second that. Like studying with classmates and like going over some things. I think for a lot of students, like at first it might be a little bit hesitant to like kind of like admit like or like kind of open up saying like, oh, like I'm like kind of behind and like I don't know this material too well. But I found that like a lot of my classmates and like myself too, like I just straight up say like, okay, like I'm weak at this like topic, like like who's like strong at this, like either like microbiology or like pathology, like like we can all like go over it together. And like since it's like pass fail and like no like grading systems or like ranking, it's really easy to just like literally like learn together and like kind of succeed together. Like that mentality is like so strong and like that connects like everyone together. We're just like trying to like like survive together, like ace it together. So I think that has been like a very good like mindset. Like every day just like reminding myself like like if I don't get this, like I always have someone or like some group of people to like rely on and like just reach out to people. I think it has been like such an open environment, which has been like really nice and like good to know that I can like survive medical school with the supportive classmates.
And I think this is a great question kind of to follow up on a lot of what we've talked about, but how do you guys deal with imposter syndrome?
I guess I'll go again. I think I felt it really through this first block of med school already. I feel like you just think that there's so much information that it's just impossible to know it all. And you feel like, I don't know, maybe perhaps you're not good enough or you don't know enough. or whatnot. But I think the key is to just, again, like always, the brain is just such a powerful thing that it's all about the mindset, and to constantly remind yourself of, all the successes that you've had up to this point. The fact that you got in here, or you are here for, specific reasons, that means that you are good enough and you are capable of doing, whatever it is that you set your mind to. So I think the key is just the mindset, to constantly help somehow just think of the positive, to bring your mind back to the purpose, the big why, and to remind yourself that you are able to do this if you've reached to this point, and that it's completely normal to feel, I think, overwhelmed at times. I think a lot of people feel the same way, even though some are better than others at masking it, I think. But it is, I would say it's inevitable not to feel that way at one point or another, because it's just a huge transition. It's so much new information, and so just so much info thrown at you at the same time, that it's definitely impossible not to feel it. But the key is just to use the coping mechanisms, the keep yourself kind of regenerated, and do things that make you happy in order to bring that mind back to the positive state.
Yeah, I think that's a really good.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, just one quick thing. I think that's a really good point too. Um, Also, I think just admitting that everyone has their like own pace is what I think is really important. So, like for me personally, I'm a pretty slow person. Like I keep asking why, like to every single like concept or like question, like why is it like this, you know? And I thought like I was getting behind every time, like like I need to catch up with this material quickly, but then I keep asking these questions, which kind of like slows me down. But I think eventually, like not really comparing yourself with like where everyone else is. Like if like someone might be like really ahead of the modules, like some people are not, and like just kind of focusing on yourself. Like when you sit down, just like okay, like just write down the stuff that like you want to get done today, at your own pace, and then like eventually like we'll get there all together. Like we will be like okay for the exam. It's just focusing on your pace, and like knowing that it's okay to be like at a different pace than like others. I think that helped me like kind of okay, like I'm okay with myself like this. I think that kind of helped me through like not feeling the imposter like syndrome too much.
Yeah, and I feel like having such a diverse class, we have students that are like PAs, and we have people with PhDs, and people who have a lot more years of experience than some other people. So I feel like it's always important to not compare yourself to other people, and like maybe somebody knows a topic better than you, but maybe the next topic you're going to be better than them. So I think it's just important to kind of find your strengths and weaknesses, and not like dwell too much upon the fact that like, oh, I don't know this, but all my other classmates or most of my other classmates do. And always use it as a learning experience. So maybe the person with the PA degree or the person with the PhD can help teach you something. So if you do have like questions, or if you're not understanding something, our classmates are pretty like, we all like to help each other, and we're always sharing resources. So everybody wants everybody to do well. So I think you can always reach out to other people, and if you know something well, always be willing to help other people. So just remember not to compare yourself, and just work on yourself and find your strengths and your weaknesses, and everybody's going to get through it together.
I think Anais said this, and I'm just gonna reiterate it because I think it's a really critical point. When you get into med school, you got in for a reason, and it was because someone who let you in knew that you would succeed and you would do fine, given the rigorous environment that you're being placed in. Always just think about the fact that if one thing is hard for you today, maybe tomorrow it will be easier for you, and then you'll be able to help another classmate who just looked like they were cruising through that one unit. Know your strengths and know your weaknesses before you go in. I think Eugene mentioned that my weakness for sure is that I get overwhelmed real quick if I have like 10 things to do on my list. So that's the simplest thing for me to do is just like spread it out over the week. So I'm doing little by little at a given amount of time. So I feel more in control of my situation. But yeah, I just think the most critical thing is find a way to where you feel a sense of control. Recognize that when you're in med school, you're there for a reason. Like it just wasn't by chance that they let you in. It wasn't a lottery. It's because, you know, you demonstrate the necessary skills to succeed. And just like know what those skills are, know what helps you study, know what doesn't help you study. And, you know, a lot of the times I'm still figuring that out on a daily basis when med school. I'm restructuring my study strategy for this current block. And it just comes with time. Don't stress. It's like, I know it's a stupid thing to say. It's like oversaid, but really you don't need to. You'll figure it out. You really will.
Yeah. And I'll say I felt probably the most amount of imposter syndrome in medical school, making the shift from preclinical learning into clinical activities. Because that's also, I think there's a very big transition into medical school. And then there's a very big transition partway through medical school when you go from being mostly in the classroom to being full-time in the clinical setting. And in the clinical setting, because you're working with different teams and each team has a different supervising physician, the expectations change a lot from team to team. And so there's kind of a process of constantly adjusting to new expectations. And initially, I think many of my classmates, myself included, found that rather intimidating. And I would echo what a lot of the other panelists have said, that just remembering that you got into medical school for a reason and you weren't just, you know, you were admitted because after like very careful evaluation of the application you gave and the interactions you had with your interviewers. But also what's been very helpful for me is finding mentors, anybody who is ahead of me in the process, even if it's just anything from a student a year ahead of me to a resident to an attending who I've worked with, who I really, really admire, and realizing that all of them to some extent still feel that way. There's always some element of doubt, or many of them still feel sometimes like, oh, maybe I don't belong in this field. And seeing people who I'm like, wow, this attending is the best attending I've ever worked with. And like, I think she's so good at her job. And like, I want to be like her in the future. Or, you know, having a student who's a year older than me or a year above me in school and feeling like, oh, they're doing all these amazing things. And like from my perspective, they're awesome. And realizing that that's still a feeling that people have later in their careers has been helpful for me. It kind of normalizes it because, you know, it's not a feeling that we should have, but it is common to have it. And it's not a bad thing if you feel that way. But just know that people who are very, very competent and very talented and who are doing incredible work, they also sometimes have that same feeling of, oh, maybe I don't belong in this field. And so I think for me personally, that was helpful to just realize that I'm not alone in feeling that. And even people who are, in my opinion, some of the best doctors I've worked with still have to handle their imposter syndrome and deal with it. Okay. And I don't see any more questions in the chat. I think a couple of our panelists responded to the two that came in, but we just have a few minutes left. So if anybody has any additional questions, please add them to the Q&A box, and maybe in the last few minutes, we'll go ahead. And if anybody has any last like words of advice or encouragement to share with our attendees and whoever is watching this in the future, maybe let's go ahead with that.
I can just say that if you all have any questions, I can drop my email in the chat box. Feel free to reach out. Happy to answer them to the best of, my abilities. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'll also drop my email in the chat. But yeah, I guess we discussed about like a lot of things today. And I know like might seem like, oh, there's like so many things going on, like for like the medical school process, like application, to like navigating med school, but you'll all make it. Like, yeah, I also didn't believe in myself when applying, but you know, we'll get through it. And yeah, just good luck to everyone who's either getting ready to apply or taking a few gap years. Yeah, it'll all work out.
Y'all are working so hard to get into medical school. So I hope that you never discount all the work and the effort that you've put in to getting to where you are now and where you will be later on.
Yeah, I think the key is to just take it one step at a time. So if it all seems overwhelming when you do the forward thinking, just break it down into like, okay, this, I'm going to take it like 1/4 at a time or 1 month at a time, and just, you know, do your best each step of the way. And then it all just somehow comes together.
Oh, I didn't realize the emails were only available to us. But yeah, I think Kate's trying to put all of them in the general chat.
Thank you for sending it, Kate.
Yeah, and I will say too that I think I came into medical school not really knowing what it was going to be like. I had very little idea of like what the structure would look like, what my day-to-day would look like, and that's a little bit intimidating. And there have been times when I've doubted myself at every step of the way, from the application process through to where I am now. And it has always worked out. And I think that probably many of my classmates would say the same thing. So I know that maybe that's not the most like, it's obviously easier to say that like from farther down the line, but just know that, you know, you're not alone in feeling that way or feeling nervous about this entire process, but you will get through it, and it will be okay, and you can do it. Think I got everybody's email. Did I miss anybody? Great. Well, thank you all so much for coming and being here and sharing your experiences. Yeah, and thank you to all our attendees for tuning in. And we're all more than happy to answer, I think, any questions that you want to send our way. So thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, guys.